How you doing, guys? I'm the Bearded Devil. Welcome to my channel. I'm basically fucking around with OBS, messing around with the layers, and just seeing if, in general, if you like a similar format. You guys can let me know in the comment section. And as always, trying to make sure my audio at least goes halfway decent. Hopefully, this recording, when I'm finished, you'll be able to hear what's being said during the video. Video in question, of course, is another Ask Yourself video. Now, this one is his retard level name the trait video. He's trying to explain it in, I guess, in some kindergarten fashion. I guess at least this is how he believes he's doing it, but it's whatever. Now, I have already seen it. This isn't new for me. But we're gonna talk shit anyway. I mean, why not, right? You know, I can't stand the fucker anyway. So let's get into this, shall we? Oh, dang it. Can you tell where I was I had started another video and, well, I had started recording this video and unfortunately had to stop because of a phone call. Anywho, let's roll that beautiful bean footage.
Here are two cubes. We'll call the cube on the left cube 1 and the cube on the right cube 2. Now, looking at these two cubes, it's clear they're different. Cube 1 is purple, cube 2 is teal. Cube 1 was made in China, cube 2 in America.
Now, both of these particular, the comparisons, the color and where they manufactured, irrelevant. In the end, when he talks about when doing the comparison, he basically boils down and say, hey, these are irrelevant, which is true. There is nothing that says these two like items, that the shape, the color. If you were colorblind and you couldn't read or you had no idea where they were from, then it's an irrelevant thing. He added, literally, these are just irrelevant things. And he knows they're irrelevant, so that's why he uses these as the example.
Cube 1 weighs 50 pounds, cube 2 weighs 100 pounds. Suppose someone, let's name them Roger, makes the statement, I can lift cube 1, but I can't lift cube 2. We could ask the question, is Roger expressing a contradictory position?
No. But you can ask Roger, why do you say that? Why do you think you can't lift cube 2? If he says, because cube 2 weighs more than cube 1, that's why. And here's the thing. Isaac is going to sit there and say that statement is a contradiction. But he's also going to say it's not a contradiction. You'll see.
At this point, a sophist may suggest that his position is clearly not contradictory. Cube 1 and cube 2 are separate objects. A contradiction requires stating something and its negation. So for Roger's position to be contradictory, he would have to either state that he can and can't lift cube 1, or that he can and can't lift cube 2. Now, this may fool low-level thinkers, but someone whose
the irony in that statement is priceless.
Mind is well trained in the detection of sophistry will say, wait.
Translation. Isaac is saying he's a really good bullshit detector while spewing bullshit. Man, dude, if you're gonna sit there and basically talk shit, it's best not to spread shit. If you're gonna, sit there and say it's, sophistry, though. Sorry. Yes, technically it's not a contradiction, and if he says at its surface, considering that without extra information, that would nonetheless still hold true. It is not a contradiction. They are two like objects, but they obviously have at least one property that would affect liftability. He'll regurgitate this later on in the video, so just you'll see. But saying that, oh well, it's not a contradiction. Or saying that it is somehow a contradiction. I'm sorry, but even though I know this is all in a hypothetical realm, it's whatever. It's a thought experiment. Had you put this into an actual pragmatic and outside of the philosophical realm, but put it in actual reality, your argument falls apart. This particular argument would just gone bye bye. But that's the difference between philosophy and reality. They don't always mesh.
Wait a second. Sure, the statement isn't directly contradictory at the surface level, but it's possible that exploring the underlying logic of the statement will, in fact, reveal a contradiction.
He explores it. Still doesn't find a contradiction until he makes it a contradiction. You'll see.
For example, the statement, appeals to authority aren't valid, but Christianity is true because the Bible says so,
is a contradiction. Even at the surface. There's no extra shit. Here's the thing. If it says appeals to authority aren't valid, but everything that the Bible says is true, how do you know that everything the Bible says is true? Because the Bible says so. Blah. But no, you see, yeah, you see, he added extra context to create the so-called not surface contradiction that really was apparent and evident. If he'd said, but Christianity is true because my priest said so, then he wouldn't be able, it would be just as obvious. He chose to say that a book says so, and in order to make some kind of effect to hide the contradiction, which it doesn't. Whatever.
Is not contradictory at the surface level, but it's extremely obvious that there is something wrong with it. Technically, the pure
Wait, hold on. Just back it up real quick.
But it's extremely obvious that there is something wrong with it. Technically,
back it up. That's weird. Give me a few seconds.
Appeals to authority aren't valid, but Christianity is true because the Bible says so, is not contradictory at the surface level.
Stop. Okay. Remember what he just said. Doesn't appear to be on the surface level. Now, this is where how you choose your words matters in some certain cases, especially when you're creating an analogy like this. If you're saying that it doesn't appear to be, which means it's not obvious. That's the point. Is that it's not obviously a contradiction.
But it's extremely obvious that there is something wrong with it.
If it's extremely obvious that something is wrong with it, even to the layman, then it's not. That's the whole point. You're sitting here going that the original statement, the guy saying I can't lift one, I can lift one, not the other. That's not obvious. If it were a contradiction, it would not be on the surface. It would not be an obvious contradiction. This analogy, within your analogy, is obvious. you can't say, God, dude, fuck you and your goddamn analogies. Please, for the love of God, learn to do that. I'm not religious, it's just a term, what the fuck ever. For the love of everything, learn to fucking use analogies. Stop fucking them up. Please.
Technically, the pure contradictions of the claim...
Oh, by the way, he contradicted himself. He created a minor contradiction right there, saying that it's not obvious, and then saying it's extremely obvious.
Claims made in this statement would be either appeals to authority are and aren't valid, or Christianity is and isn't true because the Bible says so. But it could also be the case that one of these claims implies the statement that is the pure negation of the other. And this is in fact the case. The statement that Christianity is true because the Bible says so implies that appeals to authority are valid, which is the negation of appeals to authority aren't valid. So clearly it is possible for a statement that is not directly contradictory at the surface level to contain a contradiction in its underlying logic. At this point, the sophist can be dismissed. It is, in fact, completely true to say that someone has contradicted themselves if they've made the claim that appeals to authority aren't valid, but Christianity is true because the Bible says so. Now,
because the second statement is an appeal to authority, we got that part. It's an obvious appeal to authority. It's not hidden at all. So you get that, right? Your little analogy within this analogy was in and of itself a contradiction. Your own statements made it a contradiction by saying that it wasn't very obvious and that it was extremely obvious. So it's either one or the other. It can't really be both in that case. But here we go.
Now, returning to our example of the cubes, is there a systematic way to determine whether Roger's position contains such an underlying contradiction? There is. And this
Absolutely.
would be to determine...
If he sat there and said that I can lift 100 pounds, I cannot lift cube 1, but I can lift a cube, or saying I can lift 100 pounds, but I can't lift up cube 2. That would be a contradiction. Or I can only pick up cube 1 because I did whatever. All right. Sorry. I know, middle of taping this shit, and I get messages. Whoops. Thank you for holding.
Determine if the property or properties that determine liftability are distributed unevenly between the cubes. So we examine the differing properties between the cubes one by one. Starting with color, we ask Roger, if cube 1 were teal, like cube 2, would you still be able to lift it? Yes, Roger says. The color would not impact my ability to lift cube 1. Okay, we know that the color of cube 1 could be equal.
By the way, these, again, I know he's doing it for simplicity's sake. To help all of us retards. But, really? Really? Okay.
Equalized with cube 2, and this would not affect its liftability by Roger. How about the location of the cube's assembly? We ask Roger, if cube...
What if all teal colored cubes were also coated with an ungrippable surface? What if teal equaled ungrippable surface? Just saying. I mean, you know. Just saying. The color teal made it automatically ungrippable. I don't know. A thought. Who knows?
Cube 1 were made in America like Cube 2, would you still be able to lift it? Yes, Roger says. The location where the cube was manufactured would not impact my ability to lift it.
You notice he also didn't really go on size. Which, it's, you know, it would seem to be relevant, but if you had a cube that was 50 pounds, and it was roughly the size of, I don't know, maybe an Xbox, or the 50 pounds, yeah, it was roughly the size of an ammunition box. Okay, let me give a better reference so you can kind of put this frame in mind. A couple of cinder blocks, or at least the size of a cinder block. Why not? A cinder block. Blah, blah. So it's 50 pounds, and it's the size of a cinder block, right? The other cube, not the same size. It's not twice the size. It's, I don't know, 5 times the size. The difference between like a refrigerator and a person. You know, like if you had roughly something that was the size, you know, of small, compact. It's a matter of, you know, density. So you could go there. You could sit there and say, well, there are other factors that could be involved. But since he's done it to where these are cubes, these are like items. They're roughly the same size, the same, you know, everything. The only difference is, of course, is the weight. The weight is the only actual difference. Would change liftability, right? We'll keep going.
Okay, so we know that the location of assembly of Cube 1 could be equalized with Cube 2, and this would not affect its liftability by Roger. We now ask about something that seems a bit more relevant, the cube's weight. Hey, Roger, if Cube 1 weighed 100 pounds like Cube 2, would you still be able to lift it? No, Roger says. That would be too heavy for me. I can't lift 100 pounds. Okay, so in this instance, we have determined that Roger's position is in fact consistent. There's a
Stop. Wait, hold on.
property of Cube 2, which makes it impossible for him to lift. And this property, if true of Cube 1, would render Cube 1 unliftable by him as well. Let's back up one.
Okay. Now, you see in which what happened. Or, yeah, sure, that sounds all right. In other words, no contradiction was stated. Right? He already said, there's no contradiction. Now here's where this becomes a little more towards the bullshit spectrum, end of the spectrum. You'll see.
One question. Assume that Roger's answer to the question of weight was actually, yeah, I'd still be able to lift the cube if it weighed 100 pounds.
Stop. Okay. You see what he had to do, right? He had to actually, first, he had to change the answer. The one singular factor that would have falsified Roger's statement is if he said yes. Okay, Isaac, what if he continued to say no? Would you, I don't know, move the goalposts and add other factors? You know, like, what if you, you know, add, I don't know, some kind of mechanical assistance? Could you then lift either one of those cubes? Yes. Weight could, in some way, change the ability to lift it. So, what if you just continue to say no? Do you stop the discussion at that point? Because you've shown that the original statement, his original answer, was no, I can't lift Cube 1 because of its weight. Honestly, I'll tell you right now, if you ask somebody, hey, why can't you lift this cube and that cube, and they say because it's too heavy, no contradiction. If they sit there and say something completely irrelevant to liftability, such as either how slick the surface is, how much it weighs, the ability to grip it, all the various factors that could be involved with the ability to grab it and move it. Okay, if they say none of those are a factor in being able to lift it, then they really couldn't. They couldn't actually say that they couldn't lift it. But if they say, hey, I can't lift it because it's too heavy, no contradiction. You see, you left that part out, didn't you there, boy? You simplified his position. Unlike your analogy within your analogy, you didn't necessarily make it as simplistic. You gave context, saying, and that matters. If you ask, and it is just as simple, hey, can if, and like he says, if cube 1 weighed, all right, well, what if cube 2 weighed 50 pounds? Could you lift cube 2? You know this goes both ways, right? And the analogy that you're using, you're comparing humans and animals, and which you've given over to where I want to hold on. We'll see. Hold on. Well, give me a minute.
We now know that weight is not a factor that affects liftability by Roger. Propose that we went through the entire list of qualities of Cube 2 which differentiate it from Cube 1, and none of those qualities, if present in Cube 1, would render Cube 1 unliftable. Well,
that would make Roger a liar.
Now we have a problem on our hands. If literally every single property of Cube 1 could be equalized with Cube 2, Cube 1 would become Cube 2. If Cube 1...
would it become it? Now, I do want you to pay attention to this, and I'll get
is reducible in all respects to Cube.
Motherfucker, you are frustrating on a level that I give to select human beings. You just, and this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this shit, is because of you and just the amount of frustration that I don't know if you're deliberately being an asshole as far as like being intellectually honest. I'm not gonna say because I don't know. I don't know if when you're rendering these videos, when you're sitting there writing a script or the fuck you do, I don't know whether or not you are actually, if you know that you're being this way, or that this is just how you think. That you believe the bullshit. But we'll go, and you don't see some of the particulars in this thought experiment, but
to while remaining liftable. The statement I can lift Cube 1 actually implies the statement I can lift Cube 2, which is the direct negation of the statement that I can't lift Cube 2.
It's a direct negation that you created. No offense, but that's how it is. This is why this your analogy sucks balls, is that you had to change. You had to create what's objectionable. You had to change the guy's answer. That's it. That's all it boils down to is, but you do that. You fucking do that. And so many live debates I've seen with you where you do just that. Say somebody's consistent in their moral framework, right? They apply, name the trait, whatever, and it's consistent. You can't have that. Because even if the person is consistent, you use, I don't know, maybe an appeal to popularity, maybe, to sit there and, or guilt, you guilt the individual, you know. That's the infinite, you know, cube, the box of infinite horrors, your universe box. It's only there. It's not just to show an absurdity, but even if even if the trait, whatever, is consistent and it doesn't really, in and of itself, really produce any absurdities, you will create an absurdity, right? Or you'll use an appeal to emotion by saying, hey, we're going to put your family in there. You going to kill them all? That's it. These are tactics that you're using, which, you know, again, I don't know if you're doing it because you're that kind of motherfucker, you know, where you know what you're doing, or you really fucking believe this shit and you really think that what you're saying has any substance. I'm really not sure if it's you just being completely dishonest or you just being that fucking stupid. I don't know. Maybe one, maybe the other, maybe a little bit of both.
A quick way to visualize this is to picture circles filled with points. The circles represent the cubes. The points within the circles represent their characteristics. Green points are shared characteristics. Red points are unshared characteristics. Now, imagine one by one equalizing every characteristic of cube 1 with those of cube 2. If at no point does cube 1 lose the characteristic liftable, then cube 2 is in fact a morphism of cube 1 that retains liftability.
And what if, just throwing it out there, that one characteristic of cube 2 is that it cannot be lifted. It's just an interesting thing, but just what if the characteristic is cannot be lifted through any means? It doesn't matter what color it is, it doesn't matter how much weight it is, doesn't matter all of those other factors that you're considering, but the one characteristic is it cannot be lifted. It's kind of like think about King Arthur, right? The sword and stone. Right, here's an analogy for your analogy. Yeah, the sword and the stone. The sword itself is in every way completely and absolutely identical to every other sword ever. Right? But, and if you had put any other sword and somehow managed to slam it into any other kind of rock, you could pull it out. Anybody could pull it out. Not a problem. But the one factor with Excalibur is the fact that it is unliftable by just anybody. Right? Now, you might argue, oh, well, you know, what if it was, you know, obviously King Arthur could do it. Okay. What if King Arthur was never born? Or in case died in childbirth, or died previously, or never knew the sword existed, was never around, so that for all time that sword could never be lifted because King Arthur in one shape, fashion, or form was dead, never existed, or what have you. There was no King Arthur to lift the sword. It would remain completely unliftable, but in every other way absolutely identical to every other sword that was ever made, that was ever somehow plunged into stone. Right? Thor's hammer, same difference. It did require a special property, but what if there's nobody else? What if nobody else could lift it? Right? The idea is that you're able to, that just because it looks like something, and just because it may have all kinds of other properties, one of the properties that it could have is simply not being liftable. By sitting and saying, oh, well, what if I remove that one? It's what if. What if you made object 1 identical to object 2? You can go the other way around, by the way. If that's the case, then case in point. He's using this analogy for humans and animals. Right? Okay. What about animals and plants? You're going to find that even if you trade even the one factor, remember, for instance, cube 1 is, I suppose, animals. Cube 2 is plants. You equalize cube 1 with plants. You're getting it. You're basically just taking objects, even if you say that they're exactly. But here's the thing: is you're sitting there saying they're exactly alike. Well, it's on. You trace everything back far enough, we're all the same. Everything on this planet, every living organism on this planet, came from one place. So you go far enough in any direction, you're going to end up with commonalities. And that's the whole thing. Is you're basically going, oh well, this animal and that animal. Let's have you finish it off.
So Roger would contradict himself by suggesting Cube 2 doesn't possess this characteristic. Now, just switch Cube 1 with humans, Cube 2 with animals, and liftability with moral value. That's how Name the Trait works.
Remember, Cube 1... Cube 1 is supposed to be people, right? Okay. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So Cube 1 is supposed to be humans, Cube 2 is supposed to be animals. Right? And this is supposed to sit there and say, oh, then liftability is whatever. But in order for his analogy to work, first, Roger had to say that the weight had no bearing, even though at first he said it had some kind of bearing. So there was something that did present. So there was a trait possessed by one cube and not the other that affected liftability. Roger said so, and Isaac agreed with him. However, that answer's not good enough. So, what if he said that it doesn't change anything? Okay. But you're changing the human aspect, and you're equating it into an animal. Now, typically this is done in the form of like marginal cases, which is fine. All right. But you'll notice that if the roles were reversed, say if Cube 1 was the animal and Cube 2 was the human, right? And not moral value, but at least moral responsibility was used. Meaning that you were responsible for any act that would be considered immoral or anything like that would affect morality, right? Any of these violations in morality, right, you're responsible for. Or you're responsible for ensuring that a moral outcome occurs. Either way. Now, if you sit there and say, well, okay, why is it that we don't hold animals to the same standards as humans? And then anyone, especially a vegan, will sit there and say, oh, well, unfortunately, that doesn't work that way because animals are not moral agents. You sit there and say, now, this is usually where it stops. The person goes, oh, okay, but here's where you can introduce a marginal case. Well, we still do hold individuals who are not moral agents responsible for their actions. It doesn't stop it from being immoral. It only matters on how we treat those individuals. Right? we still punish them. We still punish them in some form or another. If somebody who is mentally challenged does something that is considered immoral, they are still responsible. Well, then they're held responsible for their actions. They're punished, typically, in some way, shape, fashion, or form. They're put in either prison, which there are mentally ill individuals who are in prison. They are put in actual confinement facilities for the mentally ill, the mentally insane, or the mentally challenged. There are facilities that separate them from the rest of society so that their actions, even though the individual may or may not be, they're doing something that they may or may not know is wrong, they're still separated from society. They're still treated in, again, one form or another, as if they were a moral agent to an extent, meaning they are still held responsible for their actions. Same thing, children. Child does something you consider immoral, they are punished in some way, shape, fashion, or form. Either on the spot, reprimand, oh, don't do that, right? You pat them on the bottom, you tell them, hey, don't do that. Or, in case of killing somebody, they're sent away typically into a different facility. And if in that facility it turns out that they're a fucking sociopath or some shit like that, they try to keep them as long as possible. And as soon as they reach adulthood, blah, 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 and if they turn around and do the same thing again, then they're sent just to another facility and or are executed depending on the severity of the actual moral offense. And that's one of the things that you ask yourself, you motherfucker, you don't understand or don't want to recognize or want to forget completely, is that your analogy, this whole shit right here, could be reversed. And you could, same thing, cube 1 could be animals, cube 2 could be plants. You could equate, and you replace anything, all the characteristics, you just throw them out the window. You're equalizing. Okay, sure, all right, fine. Then the plant is the animal. Are you going to eat the animal? Chances are no, because you're a fucking vegan. Are you going to treat animals the way you would treat plants? Irrespective of the fact that there are obviously animals that are non-sentient, just as much as there are plants that are non-sentient. Obviously, there's a correlation. But sitting there saying, well, I no. Because you're going to do what you accuse everybody else of doing. You're going to use basically what amounts to a form of an argument from normality, right? A species normality, if you want to call it that, but I guess kingdom normality is probably the closest thing to it. And that's what you're doing. You're sitting here saying, well, and it's reversed too when it comes to the moral agency thing. You're relying on species normality for that to even be an argument for you, or a counter argument for when someone says, well, why don't we treat people? Well, that's the thing. Why don't we treat people the way we treat animals? The way animals treat themselves. Or why don't we hold animals accountable for their actions? And you say, well, they're not moral agents. Well, neither are, and all humans are not moral agents either. Do we just let retards kill people? No. See? But yeah, the whole kit and caboodle, this bullshit, I'm sorry, man, but go fuck yourself. If somebody is consistent, and I'm gonna tell right now, yeah, Roger, he was consistent until you made him not be. Until you made him not be. You changed his answer. And that's your trick. You get people to change their answers. Quite often. Anyway. As far as the rest of, that was pretty much the whole video. I didn't want this to be overly long, but it kind of ended up being a little longer than I expected. That's a short one for me. Anyway, guys, I plan to do a live stream sometime soon. I may even be able to invite a vegan on. I don't know. I would love for them to, well, for lack of a better term, defend their position. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again. There are no valid arguments for veganism. And if you disagree, well, by all means, give me your best argument for veganism. Until then, I'm out of here. You guys are cool. Whoever gives me the thumbs up, and whoever bothers watching this. And also, one last thing: anybody in Isaac's Discord who watches this, and you've made it all the way to the end, from me to you, from the bottom of my heart, once again, go fuck yourselves. I've been the Bearded Devil, and I'll catch you later.